أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وصلى الله على محمد وآله عليهم السلام صلوات. Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters. Usini wa iyyakum bitaqwallah. I call myself, first and foremost, and all of the believers here, to God fearfulness, consciousness, and piety. I want to begin by, first of all, congratulating all of you on the auspicious birthday of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. And this glorious month of Rajab, the days that have just passed us, we're thinking about how to describe Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali, to emulate the Imam, and to just try to understand and comprehend who Imam Ali was. And so, whenever someone wants to talk about Imam Ali, you're always trying to figure out which dimension, which aspect of the Imam you want to describe. Right? The Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib was so multifaceted. His life was such a beacon of light in all of its different dimensions that it becomes a little bit difficult to try to praise the Imam, because whenever you talk about one aspect of him, there's another aspect that maybe you'll leave off. And so in thinking about this, and thinking about not only how to describe and try to understand a little bit of the beauty of the Imam and the light that was the Imam, it'd be useful to think about the Imam in terms of a larger context. The Imam as a Hujjah, as an individual who is fulfilling this capacity and this function of an Imam. One of the descriptions, one of the attributes, one of the forms in which the Ahlul Bayt themselves describe their function is through this term, this concept of nur. The Ahlul Bayt call themselves an-nur, light. And before we get into the ahadith and the ayat that the Ahlul Bayt use to describe this dimension of an Imam, we can think about the concept of light itself. One of the ways that light has been described is something that is manifest and is illuminated in and of itself. It doesn't need something else to point towards itself. And as well, something that illuminates other things around it. So for example, when we're thinking about a light, in this room, or when the sun is in the sky, if somebody has his or her eyes open, they haven't, blocked off that light, then you don't really need anything else to see the light itself, right? When the light is turned on, the light in and of itself is manifest. It's zahir li nafsih. It's manifest in and of itself. And it is also mudhir li ghayrih. It manifests all of those other things around it. So for example, when the room is dark and you turn on the light, you can see all of the things, all of the different parts of the room. When night turns to day, not only do we see the sun itself, but we also see the rest of God's creation. Right? So this movement from darkness into light, it's not just a movement where we see the light, but it also points us towards other things around us. Maybe there are certain things that we need to be cautious of. Or there is a certain path that we're taking. Right? For those of you who have, had trouble with your headlights on your car, you'll notice that, or for example, when it is snowing. It was recently snowing for quite a bit here. When that light is taken away, it becomes difficult for you to see your path. You're driving down the road, and it becomes difficult for you to decipher where is the shoulder, where is the lane exactly, and where do I need to go. Right? You might miss the sign, you might miss your exit, and so on. And so light becomes an important thing in our lives, not only because it points to itself, but it also illuminates our path for us. And we look in the Quran and we see that Allah describes Himself as Nur. Right? Nur as-samawati wal-ard. Allah is that light that not only points to Himself, the existence and the being of Allah points to His own existence and His own being, such that we don't need really anything else other than just a moment's thought, contemplation within our own existence, within the need that we have in ourselves for us to be able to direct ourselves back to God. God illuminates Himself. He doesn't need other things to illuminate His own existence. And as well, God points out our path for us. He doesn't just illuminate Himself, but He also shows us where we need to go. He is indeed that source of light and that end to which that light is pointing. And as well, the Quran talks about other things. It refers to other things with this notion of light. In one ayah, in Surah Al-A'raf, ayah number 157, Allah talks about the Prophet and those who believe in the Prophet. The ayah goes, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم فالذين آمنوا به وعزروه ونصروه واتبعوا النور الذي أنزل معه أولئك هم المفلحون. The beginning of this ayah, this is the middle to the end of the ayah. In the beginning of this ayah, Allah talks about those who follow the Prophet, who has been ordained, the people have been told about within the previous revelations. And not only that, he is a prophet who guides them and who tells them, rather, Amr bil Ma'ruf, commands them towards good and forbids them from evil. And he also is a prophet who lifts their burdens, lifts the difficulties and the shackles that they are grasped with. And it says in this section of the ayah, he says, فَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِهِ وَعَزَّرُوهُ. Those who believe in the Prophet and honor him and follow him and follow that light that was sent with him. Those are the ones who are successful. Those are the ones who will reach success. A lot of times, many mufassirun understand this light that is mentioned in this ayah to be referring to the Quran. And indeed, the Quran is a source of light and a source of guidance that Allah has sent down with His Prophet. But when we look in the ahadith of the Ahlul Bayt, in particular, there is a hadith narrated, reported from our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam, where the Imam says, النور في هذا الموضع علي أمير المؤمنين والأئمة عليهم السلام. صلوا على محمد وعلى محمد. The lights that this ayah is referring to, that light that was sent down with the Prophet, this is Imam Ali, Amirul Mu'mineen, and the Imams after him. And when we think about, well, what does this exactly mean? Why and how exactly is Amirul Mu'mineen, Imam Ali, and the other Ahlul Bayt, the other Imams, why and how are they light? How are they this kind of thing that points to themselves and as well guides others towards the ultimate conclusion, that ultimate aim that they must have. And we think about, well, Amirul Mu'mineen, I mean, one of the, we talk about, for example, proving the wilaya of Amirul Mu'mineen, right? Proving the greatness and the superiority and the primacy of Amirul Mu'mineen over all of the other companions of the Prophet. If we think about Amirul Mu'mineen as a light that shines and is illuminated in and of himself, we don't really need to come up with very complicated arguments and complicated proofs to think about, well, this proves that Amirul Mu'mineen was the true successor of the Prophet. This is why Amirul Mu'mineen should be followed and his life should be emulated. When we look at the life of Amirul Mu'mineen, Imam Ali, it is like a light that shines in and of itself. For anyone who has opened their eyes and who is truly seeking a good life. In fact, this is a question that we all ask ourselves. What is that good life that we must lead? Right? We think about all of this progress that we have in all of these different dimensions, all of these different industries, all of these different material aspects of our lives. And yet we're always come back to these simple questions. What is that good life that we must lead? What is goodness itself? What is virtue? In all of these different things, if we just look and read about the life of Amirul Mu'mineen and the words of Amirul Mu'mineen, not only in terms of his actions and his behaviors, but also those words that he has bestowed on us, those teachings that he has given to us, we see that Amirul Mu'mineen was that ultimate student. If there was just a single student that the Prophet had, just a single student that the Prophet had that was left after him, we can just look at Amirul Mu'mineen as that ultimate example of the teachings of the Prophet. That light that was sent along with the Prophet for the guidance of humankind. And so we don't really need to come up with complicated arguments. Somebody who, for example, wants to emulate an individual, just look at the life of Amirul Mu'mineen, not only in the bravery and the courage, the physical, the outward that he presented, but also in the way that he led the society of his time. Both in the way that he was quiet, those moments where he could not speak, as well as those moments when he could. A lot of times we look simply at those teachings of the Imams, but sometimes their silence itself is very telling. Why did Imam Ali, why was he silent for moments of his life? For many years of his life? Why did he not come out into society? Right? Those are moments where we can learn from the life of Amirul Mu'mineen itself as well. And so, looking at the life and the beauty in which the Imam emulates, the beauty that the Imam emulates, those are signs of the primacy of Amirul Mu'mineen themselves. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And yet there's this dual aspect to light. It's not only something that illuminates itself, but it's also something that illuminates our path and the things around it. And before moving on to this second part, I want to just mention that the Quran, whenever it talks about light, it also doesn't talk about it in exclusive terms. It doesn't say that these people have 100% of guidance, and these people have 100% of light, and these people have nothing. Right? It's not binary. It's not either you have it or you don't. In fact, the Quran talks about even those who blind themselves to light, blind themselves to guidance, they as well have some amount of light. In Surah Al-Baqarah, the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah divides up humankind into 3 different main categories. And the Quran talks about the mu'minun, those who, the muttaqun. And then the Quran talks about the mushrikun. And then the Quran talks about the munafiqun. And this ayah of the Quran, it's ayah number 17 and 18 of Surah Al-Baqarah, where Allah says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم مثلهم كمثل الذي استوقد نارا فلما أضاءت ما حوله ذهب الله بنورهم وتركهم في ظلمات لا يبصرون صم بكم عمي فهم لا يرجعون. These are a people, their example is like the example of a person who kindles a fire. And when all of those things around him appear, when they become illuminated, God takes away their light and leaves them in that darkness. And they cannot see. And they are deaf, they are dumb, and they are blind. And they are not going to return. And they will not return. And so God does not, it's interesting here that Allah does not say that these people don't have any access to guidance. They don't have any reference points. They don't have any lights themselves. Allah says that they do have some small amount of light. They've blinded themselves. They've closed themselves off to that ultimate source of guidance, that wellspring of light, which is the Prophet and his message. And yet they still have some amount of light themselves. But what they do is, right when they kindle this fire, right when they start this fire, and although their surroundings, their environment becomes enlightened for them, then all of a sudden God takes away that light. And so they're grasping, for what they must do. Where is the next step that I must take? Maybe they will just see the next step that they can take, but their ultimate destination, they aren't able to see. And so we see that maybe they are able to overcome one crisis, but then the next step is simply overcoming another crisis. They're not directing their aims, they're not directing their actions and their efforts towards that ultimate goal that they are trying to get to, that they must get to. They're simply overcoming one crisis after another. And this takes us to one of the main functions that we have for following the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt. When we say that, for example, what is the benefits that we derive from the Ahlul Bayt in our day and age? One of the main things is that right when we come out of a crisis, out of, for example, this pandemic that we are faced with, right, what are we going to do after that? Inshallah, Allah will relieve us of this pain and this crisis. But our next question should be, what is our next step? Is our next step going to be simply overcoming the next crisis? Simply taking one step at a time? Or are we directing our aims, are we directing our actions and our efforts towards that ultimate goal that we are trying to reach? What is our path? Again, we go back to those simple questions that we'll have. What is a good life that we must lead? What are those things that we must try to get to? Those aims and those goals that we must have and we must dedicate ourselves to. And so when we think about learning from the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, we must think ourselves not only of overcoming one crisis at a time, but as well of directing our lives towards those goals that the Ahlul Bayt have set for us. Not only in our material well-being, but also in our physical, our spiritual well-being. Inshallah, in the next khutbah, I will talk about one of those teachings of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Where we can try to direct our efforts towards inshallah reaching. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. صلوات. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أرسله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله ولو كره المشركون. صلوات. Astaghfirullah Rabbi wa atubu ilayh. Seek forgiveness for all of the believers here and myself. Seekum bitaqwallah. Inshallah, just the few minutes that we have left, I want to just mention one of the hadith, one of the reports that is narrated from Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. And this is a set of principles that Imam Ali had mentioned, and that is compiled in that final section of Nahj al-Balagha, in those hikam that are listed there. It is towards the beginning. There's different ways that these narrations have been compiled, different versions and editions of these narrations, and so we'll just mention two of those narrations. Please send a loud salawat. It is reported that the Imam said, "Man radiya an nafsihi kathura as-sakhitu alayh." A person who is self-satisfied, who admires himself, who is conceited and only tries to bring himself up, increases the enmity of others towards himself. It's interesting because sometimes when we try to admire ourselves, when we try to boast about ourselves, we are doing it simply to get others to come towards us. We say that, for example, I have something really good, say an attribute of virtue of some kind, or maybe some sort of material possession, and I'm trying to attract others towards me, towards myself. But by doing this, by admiring myself, what I'm doing is actually repelling others. And this is one of those teachings that we have of Imam Ali that I think particularly applies to our world today. When we think about what are the virtues, what are the values that our society imposes on us sometimes, in particular certain societies, they will impose this admiration of the self, thinking, well, what do I want? What are those things that I want beyond or before even thinking about what others want? Right? This is maybe something that seems somewhat trifling, somewhat simple. But it's actually, when we think about the priorities that we have in our own lives, we see that a lot of times we think about our own wants and our own needs before the needs or the wants of others. And we say that we are justified in thinking about our own wants because otherwise we might, harm ourselves, right? If I don't think about myself, then maybe I will ultimately, if I'm always thinking about other people, maybe I'm going to ultimately bring some harm to myself, never thinking about myself. And so we go the exact opposite. We say that I should only think about myself and my own wants first, and then I think about the wants of others. What we see in the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt is to align our wants. What I want should not be for myself, but should be for the sake of Allah. And so slowly when I come on this path of aligning my wants with the wants of Allah, I will start to see that in fact, ultimately I will get to a point where my wants in fact become the fulfilling of the wants of others or the needs of others. I think about what wants and what needs does my family have? How can I sustain? How can I help the rest of my family? What can I do for my community? What can I do for my society? Right? Ultimately, when we increase our own capacity to think beyond ourselves, we will get to a point where our wants become the fulfilling of others' needs and the desires of others. The opposite of this is we are constantly thinking about ourselves, that brings about, not only does that take us away from our ultimate goal, but it also repels all of those others around us. Another hikmah, another wise words of wisdom that we have narrated from Amir al-Mu'mineen is وَأَعْمَالُ الْعِبَادِ فِي عَاجِلِهِمْ نُصُبُ أَعْيُنِهِمْ فِي آجِلِهِمْ. The actions of the believers, the worshippers, or the people in their present moment will be set before their eyes in the future. Some say that, for example, this is in the present world. Whatever we do in the present world, you will see that the results of that in the next world. And in fact, we have ayat that indicates this. One ayah of the Quran, Surah Al-Imran, ayah number 30. Allah describes the hereafter saying, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يوم تجد كل نفس ما عملت من خير محضرا وما عملت من سوء تود لو أن بينها وبينه أمدا بعيدا. There will be a day that each and every soul will find whatever good they have done, they will find it present. And whatever evil they have done, they will wish that between them and that action was the farthest distance possible. They will try to distance themselves and they will wish and hope for trying to separate themselves from that action. And we think about this as the month of Rajab. Month of Ramadan is only, a month, 30 days, and maybe a half a month away, right? Only maybe 45 days away. It's coming up. We have to think about what are those things, what are those aims that we have for the month of Ramadan? What do we want to attain from that month? We have to start preparing our actions, maybe changing our daily routines, maybe fasting for a few days in this month and the following month to prepare ourselves, to prepare our bodies, so that we can hit the ground running. The first few days, the first few weeks of the month of Ramadan, we're trying to just, if we don't prepare ourselves, we're just trying to clear our heads, prepare our bodies, right? If we can just take a moment, take a few days to prepare ourselves before the month comes, again, maybe it's getting into the habit of doing a simple dua after salat, or doing an extra prayer throughout the day. Nafila that we are recommended to do. Whatever benefit and blessing we want out of the month of Ramadan, we should start preparing for that now. In fact, these 2 months are set for precisely that, to prepare ourselves for those days that, so that we are not tired the first 15 days, and then the next 15 days we're waiting for the month to end. We want to come to the month of Ramadan prepared, so that our a'mal now will be present in front of our eyes on that, in that upcoming time. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar fasalli li rabbika wanhar إن شانئك هو الأبتر. الله صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. وصلى الله على محمد وآل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. صلوات. وعلى علي أمير المؤمنين، وعلى فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين، وعلى الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة أجمعين، وعلى علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والحجة بن الحسن القائم المهدي صلوات الله عليهم أجمعين.